I know you've been welcomed twice formally already, but I'm from the Cape Flats, and we haven't welcomed you to Cape Town if we don't actually sing that little song that says, "Welcome to Cape Town," and then we go on to say, "Hello, hello, how's it?" And that simply means that from our hearts to your hearts, the warmest of Cape Town welcomes. And what you're also going to hear when you do your township tour is the distortion of the hello. People will say, "Hello, hello." And that simply means, sorry, I don't quite agree with you there. So when you do your township tour, distinguish between the two hellos. The honor we feel at Distell for being invited to do this talk is enormous. We know that you had far more illustrious names to choose from, and we initially felt quite intimidated and awed. But I want to thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to give a message from Distell on values-based leadership. The essence of the message I would like to leave you with this evening is that values-based leadership, from our perspective, should be seen as a cradle-to-grave imperative, and that its scope should be wide enough to include everybody. As soon as we're born, we acquire basic human rights, and we continue to enjoy those rights simply by being human beings who are alive. Similarly, our values sit at the very core of our humanity. Like our basic human rights, our values are constant, they are dependable, they are non-negotiable. The human rights protect our freedom in multiple respects. You know that they afford us access to basic health care, to a safe environment, and many other things. And it's our values that drive us to respect these rights. Values like honesty, integrity, self-respect, respect for others, acceptance of responsibility and accountability. For example, the right to human dignity is a basic human right. Respecting human dignity is a value-driven action. You know, when Mother Teresa was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and she delivered her acceptance speech, and this was way back in 1979, she told the story of a beggar who had lived on the streets all his life. And when he was brought into their home for caring, he was covered in maggots, his whole body, only his face was clear. And after they tended to him, he said to her, "Thank you so much. I lived all my life like an animal, but now I will die like an angel. I feel loved and I feel cared for." And that was an act of values in action. So getting everyone in an organization to engage in value-driven action, like the simple one Mother Teresa engaged in, is a leadership challenge. At the same time, it's the kind of action that should be inculcated in children, even before they go to primary school. It's the kind of action that should be reinforced in learners when they enter high school. It's the kind of action that should be explained to every new employee in an organization. It's also the kind of action that leaders should be reminded of when they act with undue harshness. And this is what I mean by cradle to grave. At every opportunity, we must enforce the need for people to recognize our common humanity. Because after everything is said and done in business, after major mergers and acquisitions, after major restructuring, in the end, even when the synergies have been achieved, the strongest element we have in common is our common humanity. And our values are at the core of our common humanity. Let me return for a minute to the concept of leadership. There's certainly no need for me to explain leadership to anyone in this room. I'm sure you can explain it far better than I could. But one of the highly respected South African leaders whose work Distell has admired over the years and identified with is the South African business leader Brunt Pretorius. And in his new book, In the Driving Seat, he describes leadership quite inspiringly, and I want to share that with you if it's okay. He writes, "Leadership represents the single most important advantage of every world-class organization, the source of every great achievement, and the bedrock of extraordinary life. It controls and it shapes destinies. It can build or it can destroy. Inspirational leadership lights inner fires. It ignites emotions, purpose, goals, shared values, and beliefs. Effective leadership turns weakness into strength, obstacles into stepping stones, despondency into hope. The bottom line is that great leadership matters. And you'll remember when Martin Luther King was addressing the crowds, at one point he said, "We will carve a tunnel of hope through a mountain of despair." And the leader who can galvanize people's sense of value is the same leader who can work with people to carve tunnels of hope through mountains of despair. Now, this same Pretorius says a true leader possesses multiple attributes. For instance, there has to be basic intelligence, and this has got to be supported by moral intelligence, spiritual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and adversity intelligence. In turn, intelligence has to be underpinned by integrity, humility, hardiness, discipline, and a positive attitude. Now, one would think these attributes are enough. Pretorius says, no. They have to be augmented by skills such as strategic and innovative thinking, strong decision-making capability, assertiveness, self-management, ability to communicate clearly, and by effective execution skills. And he has a lot of people agreeing with him. But leaders at the bottom of organizations, are they going to examine themselves and look for these attributes? Or do they have an innate sense? And I think this is what we also need to take in mind. A lot of people low down in organizations have an innate sense of what drives people's values, people they know, people they live with, people they go to church with. Procter & Gamble CEO Bob McDonald says the value-based leader must have some additional qualities as well. She's got to be purposeful and courageous. She's got to be willing to choose the harder path rather than the easier one, as long as it's the right path. And the value-based leader welcomes diversity because it ignites and it spurs innovation. And that's one of our hardest challenges as leaders, isn't it? It's to turn diversity into a source of creativity rather than a reason for conflict. So does this mean that the values-based leader has to be some kind of super being? Harry Kramer says, and he's written this book, From Values to Action. He says, no. Anyone can achieve value-based leadership. All it takes is a desire to do the right thing by making decisions and choices that are aligned to your values. In Kramer's view, value-based leadership is underpinned by 4 principles. One is self-reflection, because that enables one to identify one's own values and what matters most to one. And if you know Shakespeare, you'll know 300 odd years ago, the character of Polonius was giving his son some advice before he sent him off into the world. And he said, "And to thine own self be true, and thou canst not then be false to any man." And how often haven't we wished people were more authentic, that people didn't put on facades? So that's the one underpinning principle, says Kramer. Another is balance, because it's that balance that creates curiosity about multiple perspectives. It's the willingness to find out how other people feel, what are their points of view. Often one hears tales of the managing director wanting to reach out to the people and to engage at every level. And when I was with Shell, our managing director once said, "From now on, you will put me in a lift where I've got access to a key that will take me straight up to the 25th floor from the ground floor. Because I've had it now. Every time I get into the lift, eager to talk, the entire lift goes quiet." But does that stop him from reaching out and getting the multiple perspectives? No, because he knew he had to get those perspectives. He had to hear the different points of view. The other one is self-confidence, because it helps one to identify one's own strengths and weaknesses and to feel comfortable in one's own skin. Because what I've noticed, and John talked so eloquently about the petrol attendants, but what I've noticed about the stereotypical petrol attendant is that they see right through facades. They can see at the core of your being, and they have an intuitive sense of who's authentic and who's false. And they have an intuitive sense of that 4th principle, the genuine humility, because that humility keeps one grounded, and it makes it easy for one to treat everyone with respect. I used to get a lot of speeding fines, and my brother once got a speeding fine for the first time, says there's no way it can be him. It must have been me who was driving. He's going to court. Now he swears the story in court was that the magistrate got very irritated with one person and he said, "Oh no, not you again. No. I've been in this court for 8 years and I've seen you countless times. I'm sick of this. You must stop getting up to this nonsense." And the accused fellow looked at the magistrate and said with the most bland and innocent expression on his face, "But Your Honour, it was not my fault if Your Honour can't get a promotion to another court." But it's that, very basic, simple home truths that keep leaders grounded. And it's often the people who feel they don't have anything to gain from the interaction with the leaders who keep them grounded. But as you know, ideally these 4 principles should work together because that's what makes the leaders most influential. I do share Kramer's view that everybody can be a value-based leader. But who among us doesn't realize how hard it is to do the right thing when the pressure not to do the right thing is almost unbearable? The other factor to consider is that physically the distance between the mind and the heart may be short. In a practical business, government, civic society situation, the distance is often long, and one so long sometimes that you can't cover it. And it's at times like those that the unshakable values in people, particularly in courageous and honest leaders, are needed to help people travel that long distance between the mind and the heart. One of the most recent examples of this is that inspiring yet very scary story of Michael Woodford of Olympus. Remember, he had hardly been appointed CEO when he uncovered a major scandal. And here he probably had several 100,000 shares in the business. He was the first non-Japanese person to be appointed to head this 40,000 strong company. And he had to make this crucial decision. Do I be courageous and honest and expose this? Or do I just keep quiet and protect my job? He chose the honest and courageous route. And when you read his book, Exposure, you'll see that his sacrifice was enormous. But in the end, he did the right thing and he felt better for it. In the end, we at Distell, we were dealing with a far less significant issue. We run this annual Fleur de Cap Theatre Awards, and there are 20 categories in which people win prizes for Best Actor or Best Actress, Best Director. And the administrators of the judging panel made a mistake. They awarded 2 of the awards to the wrong people. And the gala event happened and people got their prizes in full view of the public. It was captured in the media. And 2 days after the event, it was discovered that 2 of the awards went to the wrong people. And as is often the case, the judges then said, "Listen, you're the Director of Corporate Affairs. This is your problem." So what did we have to do? We're custodians of the company's reputation. The advice from the media to us was, no. This is going to be a scandal. The awards will never, ever be the same again. Do you know what people are going to do to you? They're going to crucify you. And we said, well, what are people going to do if they don't know now, but they find out in 3 years' time? And so the action we took was to contact the people who were most affected, in our view, the people who got the prizes wrongfully, to explain to them what had happened, then to contact the people who should have gotten the prizes. We allowed the people who got the prizes wrongfully to keep the prize money, but we had to take away the award because the recognition had to go to the rightful people. And you know what? When we told the one person what had happened, the one person who got the prize wrongfully, he said, "Oh, did she win? Well, it's no loss if I've lost to her." And they were so gracious. And then when we had a media briefing to explain what had happened, the media said, "But are you telling us the truth here? Why are you coming out with this? Why would you do this? And at first they wouldn't believe us. Months later, the same person who got his prize taken away from him was asked, his play was called Dirt, and he was asked, so what's the dirt on Vliet de Kap? And he said, no, I don't think there's any dirt. I think the organizers made a genuine mistake, and they owned up about it. And for us, that was an affirmation that values-based leadership works. In the end, people see right through a lack of authenticity or through dishonesty. And we were always guided by that one line from Martin Luther King's speech that said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And again in life one sees that. So how do you distinguish the value-based leader from other leaders? According to Harry Kramer, it's a belief in the greater good and an ability to use words, action, and example to inspire and motivate others to pursue what matters most. So this is why a lot of us at Distell believe that values-based leadership should permeate the entire organization and not just be restricted to people at the top. But this is far easier said than done. I mean, Barack Obama was acutely aware of that. Remember when he was planning for the presidential race, he said, it's not the magnitude of America's problems that bothered him. He said it's the smallness of its politics. And years later, when he was swept into power on the Great Weekend Change mandate, he was to discover that actually he can change very little because of the smallness of the politics. But just like his personality did, a leader's personality can play a pivotal role in whether or not people internalize and live an organization's values. Jeff Keogh pointed this out in the Harvard Business Review last year when he said, the essential truth is that when a political candidate assumes office and takes the reins of leadership, citizens are being led by a personality. And we've seen it again and again. And the same goes for business leaders. Look at Jack Welch at General Electric. Look at Steve Jobs at Apple. Of course, neither Jack Welch nor Steve Jobs were known for their humility. But in my experience, humility is a crucial attribute of the values-based leader, because it gives leaders that common touch that makes people at lower levels of the organization respond to their leadership. It's also what keeps leaders in touch with the real issues, the issues that bother the masses of the people. Take the example of Muhammad Yunus, who won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work at the Grameen Bank. Again and again, his government tried to intervene to turn this into a traditionally run business. But he was absolutely determined that he and those who worked with him would use his creative power to run a successful social business that would strive for operational efficiency, but the emphasis would be on helping poor people, and it would be a successful social business. In South Africa, there's the oft-quoted example of Nelson Mandela, visionary, principle-centered, transformation-centered. Remember how, if you've seen the movie Invictus, how Nelson Mandela was portrayed? Everybody expected him to come out bitter, fiery, arguing the case for nationalization. Instead, he recognized that his job was not to forecast rain, but to build the arks. And he set about doing that systematically and with a charisma and a determination that left many people today still in awe of him. So the nation sits in dread that Madiba is going to pass away soon. Why is that? Why is it when we've got a president who got swept into leadership of his political party with a majority of over 70%? The truth is that Nelson Mandela appealed not only to people's goodness, but he provided authoritative leadership. The story about President Thabo Mbeki was that he was an inspirational leader in terms of his intellect. He was seen as an excellent manager of government, but he was far removed from the people. And people say, how can you vote in a president who's patently corrupt? And here at this business school, Abel Sitole at the Institute for Futures Research has given a long argument about how we shouldn't underestimate the ticket in which President Zuma came to power. But one of the reasons is that whereas Mbeki was too busy managing government to work with the people, President Zuma is too busy working with the people to worry about government. The other thing they worry about is there's this man who's patently corrupt, whose great fear is that if he didn't become president, he would be imprisoned straight away. But the people who vote him into power also say, well, if the president can do that, then why can't I? And if the president's gone, how quickly will the window of corruption close? So that's a real challenge we deal with in South Africa. And what's the answer to that? The answer has to be values-based leadership. The answer has to be that we've got to get to people at all levels of all organizations and inculcate values. Inculcate that values mean respect for human rights, but values also mean action. Values also means taking leadership just where you are. So how does Distell then, this was the question I think you put to me, Kate, how does Distell respond to this challenge for values-based leadership? Let me tell you a bit about Distell. It's not a big company by international standards. Our market capitalization is around 22 billion rand. Our turnover per annum is around 14 billion rand. We employ 4,800 people, and we producers and marketers of wines and spirits and ciders. We're fairly substantial producers, second biggest cider producer in the world, probably in the top 12 of wine and in the top 8 of brandy. And we've got an overall statement of strategic intent that includes our vision, our strategic objective, our guiding principles, and our values. And we have 6 values. We say people should feel a sense of ownership, entrepreneurial spirit, a performance-driven culture, customer and consumer market orientation, respect for the individual, and a global mindset responsive to change. When we first started to talk to people about the values, people said in Afrikaans, oh yeah, I know about the values. I've got it in that little book. You know that bookie that you gave us? So what's inside the book? It's something, ask the people at head office, they'll tell you. So the challenge was immediate and obvious, How do we get people to understand and live the values? And fortunately, that challenge has been overcome. But one of the bigger issues we're dealing with at the moment, and I think Michael Porter puts his finger right onto it, is that more and more society is beginning to look at the alcoholic beverages industry and say, those profits you're making, do you actually earn them? Are you actually of benefit to society? Or are you now a threat to the health and stability of society? And you'll remember Porter talked about whereas business was axiomatically seen as this force for good, and what was good for business was good for the community. Now he's talking about, well, what's good for society is good for business. And that's the challenge we face. We've risen fairly successfully to the environmental challenges. We know that Distell is wholly dependent on the long-term health of the environment to sustain our production. The climate of a particular growing region and the resources such as soil, water, energy, climate, they're all of pivotal importance. And we focus on all of these in our work. We've been able to develop a greenhouse gas reporting database, and that helps us to set targets. We've also been able to take quite a goal-directed approach to certain things. Last year, we've developed a means of capturing carbon dioxide and then purifying it for reuse, because we use a lot of carbon dioxide in our ciders. And what we found is we've been able to reduce our carbon footprint and at the same time supply all our carbon dioxide needs. We could even sell off some of the carbon dioxide. Similarly, we've achieved a high level of water savings through water recycling initiatives. Just up the hill from you, we've got the Durbanville Hills Winery. They've got that down to quite a fine art now. And packaging materials, we sell about 500 million litres of product a year. The Give Back, Get Back campaign that we run means that consumers can return their glass bottles and get a deposit. And through this campaign, we were able to reuse nearly 133 million glass bottles. So that's quite a substantial save, and it's also quite a substantial carbon footprint reliever. Because that also meant that we saved over 74,000 tons of glass. But our biggest challenge at the moment, you see that part, the environment part, was easy because people could see the sense of it. People could say, yes, this is good for business, this is good for the environment, this is good for bringing in local suppliers. Government would be willing to partner with us easily. The process was transparent. We could be held accountable because we gave reports. But the harder part we face is that people look at us and say, okay, so your product destroys families. Your product causes mothers to give birth to babies with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Your product is destroying our youth because they engage in underage drinking, they engage in binge drinking. Your product is giving spouses headaches because the breadwinner stops at the shebeen first, pays off last week's debt, and incurs new debt. The issue is not that the majority of South Africans actually don't drink alcohol. The issue is not that the minority who do choose to drink do so responsibly. The issue is that that minority that abuses the product abuses it to such an extent that it causes major problems. So the health department says, well, when people abuse alcohol, they fight, or they drive cars and cause road accidents. And so they end up in the trauma care units of the public hospitals. And it causes millions of rands of drain on the fiscus. Social development says, when people spend too much money on liquor, there's no more money left for food. And so people start wanting social grants. Police say when people get drunk, they're a public nuisance and they cause discomfort to other people. Transport says we incur a whole lot of expense because they cause road accidents. So how do we respond to that? Because that is at the core of our sustainability challenges. So we've looked at the Porter model. We've looked at the work done by Barnett on when is social, how does he put it? When does it pay to be really good? And what we found is that although certain government departments, like the Department of Health and the Department of Social Development, are very anti-liquor, Economic Affairs says, hey, hang on, you're dealing with our biggest beverage export here. The Treasury is saying, hang on, we know that nearly 60% of the liquor company's income comes into the fiscus in the form of taxes. And so we need that integration. And using the Barnett model, we are building stakeholder capacity with government, with civic society, with thought leaders. And we feel confident that we are now moving to a stage where we can begin to integrate the social needs with the economic needs. And so that essentially is the strategy. I think my time is running out. But I want to leave you with a concluding remark. I said that I'm making a plea that the inculcation of values and a values-driven society should be a cradle-to-grave imperative. But it's also hard to practice values-based leadership. Now, I want to re-emphasize the importance of always doing the right thing. And I ask you to ponder the words of Professor Jorgen Randens during his address last year at the 10th Annual Distinguished Lecture Series on Sustainable Development. Professor Randers said, if I could persuade you of one thing, it should be this. The world is small and fragile, and humanity is huge, dangerous, and powerful. This is a total reversal of the biblical perspective on humanity and the way in which man has thought during most of his presence on earth. But this is the perspective we need to take if we are to be sure that sustainability emerges, or at least that the world as we know it survives for a couple of 100 years more. Thank you.